In today's video, we're exploring the true stories of famous people claimed by deadly animals, from a South African wildlife expert killed by his snakes, to a Hawaiian lifeguard taken by a shark offshore. But first, the world watched in shock as Steve Irwin met his fate beneath the waves. It was September 4th, 2006, off the coast of Port Douglas, Queensland. The sky was clear, and the turquoise water of Bat Reef shimmered under the morning sun. On board the small research vessel, Croc 1, a camera crew prepared to film segments for an ocean documentary called Ocean's Deadliest. The project aimed to explore some of the most dangerous marine creatures found in Australian waters. Leading the shoot was one of the world's most recognizable wildlife presenters, Steve Irwin. Steve Irwin was 44 years old, known globally as the crocodile hunter. He had spent decades promoting wildlife conservation and educating the public through his energetic television series. Born in 1962 in Victoria, Australia, Steve grew up surrounded by animals. His parents, Bob and Lynn Irwin, owned a small reptile park in Queensland, where Steve learned to handle snakes and crocodiles before he was even a teenager. By his 20s, he was already an experienced wildlife handler and trapper, working closely with conservation agencies to relocate crocodiles from populated areas to protected zones. In 1996, his television career took off when The Crocodile Hunter aired internationally. The show combined education with adventure, featuring Steve interacting directly with some of the world's most dangerous species. His enthusiasm for wildlife was unmatched, and his catchphrase, "Crikey," became synonymous with his fearless curiosity. His work helped millions understand animal behavior and the importance of conservation. But it also came with risk. He had faced venomous snakes, aggressive crocodiles, and unpredictable wild creatures countless times. To the public, he seemed untouchable, someone who could always read nature's rhythm and move with it. In early September 2006, Steve and his crew were between major filming segments when bad weather paused production. Rather than waste time, Steve decided to film behind-the-scenes material for his daughter Bindi's children's show. They moved to a smaller inflatable boat near Bat Reef, where the water was calm and clear enough to film underwater shots of marine life. The plan was simple: capture footage of stingrays gliding across the sand. It was meant to be a filler segment, far safer than his usual encounters with crocodiles or sharks. The dive started uneventfully. The crew, including cameraman Justin Lyons, followed Steve as he snorkeled above the coral, observing the graceful movement of a large stingray resting on the seabed. Stingrays are generally docile animals that avoid confrontation, so there was little sense of danger. But in a matter of seconds, that calm changed. As Steve moved closer, the stingray reacted suddenly. According to eyewitness accounts, the animal propped upward and struck several times in rapid succession with its tail. Each strike was powered by reflex, a defensive response common when stingrays feel trapped or threatened. One of the strikes pierced through Steve's chest, and the serrated barb penetrated his heart. The injury was catastrophic. The camera captured the attack as it happened. Justin Lyons immediately stopped filming and rushed toward Steve, pulling him to the surface. The crew helped him onto their inflatable boat and began performing CPR. Despite years of handling high-risk wildlife, Steve had rarely been seriously injured on camera. This moment was entirely unexpected. The crew kept pressure on the wound and continued resuscitation efforts as they sped towards the larger research vessel. The radio was used to call for emergency medical assistance, but they were more than an hour from shore. CPR continued non-stop as they tried to keep his heart pumping. Eyewitness accounts later stated that Irwin was conscious for only moments before losing responsiveness, and that he appeared aware of the injury's severity in those final seconds. When the boat reached low isles, paramedics were already standing by, but the damage to his heart was too severe. Efforts to revive him continued for over an hour before he was pronounced dead at the scene. The official cause of death was cardiac trauma from a stingray barb wound. News of Steve Irwin's death spread rapidly across Australia and then the world. Shock turned to disbelief. The man who had spent decades surviving close encounters with crocodiles, venomous snakes, and wild animals had been killed by a stingray, a creature rarely considered dangerous to humans. The raw footage of the incident was handed over to Queensland Police as part of the investigation. Out of respect for his family, it was never released publicly. The stingray itself was not captured or harmed. Marine biologists later explained that the animal's defensive behavior was a natural reflex triggered by sudden movement above it, not an act of aggression. Steve Irwin's funeral was held privately, followed by a public memorial at the Australia Zoo, where over 5,000 people gathered and millions more watched on television. His daughter Bindi, then 8, delivered a short eulogy. Tributes arrived from around the world. Flags in Australia were lowered, and visitors filled the zoo with flowers and letters. The family declined a state funeral and buried him on the zoo grounds. In the years that followed, Terry, Bindi, and Robert continued his conservation work through the Australia Zoo and the Wildlife Warriors Foundation. His death underscored that even the most skilled wildlife experts face nature's unpredictability, and his legacy endures in global efforts to protect and understand wildlife. Where Irwin's life ended beneath clear tropical water, another educator faced danger on dry ground. His lessons weren't about stingrays or coral reefs, but about fangs, venom, and the risks hidden in routine demonstrations. It was late September 2024 in KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. The spring heat had settled across the green valleys near Hillcrest, where wildlife conservationist and educator Graham "Dingo" Dinkelman worked inside his reptile facility. The man known to his followers as South Africa's Steve Irwin was performing one of the countless tasks that had defined his life: caring for and studying venomous snakes. For years, Dinkelman had been a familiar name in wildlife education circles. He operated Dingo's Animal Kingdom, a conservation park and educational facility where visitors could observe snakes, crocodiles, and other native species up close. Through social media, television appearances, and YouTube videos, he built a large following by showing the beauty and danger of animals that most people feared. His goal was to shift public perception, to replace fear with respect. His direct handling of venomous species became both his trademark and his greatest risk. Born and raised in South Africa, Dinkelman had developed his fascination with reptiles early in life. He built his career not around shock value, but around understanding animal behavior and promoting coexistence. Those who knew his work described him as methodical and experienced, someone who understood both the biological and human aspects of wildlife management. He was often called the South Africa's Steve Irwin, not for imitation, but for his shared commitment to public conservation and hands-on education. In September 2024, during a routine handling session with one of the venomous snakes in his collection, Dinkelman was bitten. Reports later stated that the incident occurred while he was managing his reptile enclosures. Venom entered his system, and within moments, he began experiencing symptoms consistent with a severe allergic reaction. What made this bite especially dangerous was not just the venom itself, but an anaphylactic response, a sudden and overwhelming reaction from his immune system. His wife, Kirsty, immediately called for medical assistance. Dinkelman was rushed to a nearby hospital and admitted to the intensive care unit, where doctors administered treatment to counteract the venom and stabilize his condition. The effects, however, were severe. The bite had triggered a rapid systemic reaction, affecting his breathing and heart function. Within hours, his condition became critical, and doctors placed him in a medically induced coma to control the reaction and prevent further complications. For several weeks, he remained under constant observation. His medical team attempted multiple interventions, including antivenom administration and life support to maintain organ function. Despite these efforts, his condition showed little improvement. Updates from his family described a period of uncertainty and exhaustion as they waited for signs of recovery. On October 26, 2024, after roughly a month of hospitalization, Graham "Dingo" Dinkelman died from complications related to the snakebite. He was 44 years old. The cause of death, according to reports, was linked to an anaphylactic reaction to the venom, which caused systemic organ failure despite antivenom treatment. News of his passing spread rapidly through South Africa and across international wildlife communities. Media outlets, including NBC News and People magazine, reported on his death, emphasizing his role as one of Africa's most recognizable wildlife personalities. Tributes poured in from followers, conservationists, and fellow educators who had been inspired by his energy and commitment. For many, the parallels to Steve Irwin were striking. Both men had dedicated their lives to bridging the gap between humans and animals. Both had faced danger as part of their daily work, and both had died at the same age, 44, following encounters with the species they had spent their lives protecting. But Dinkelman's death was not the result of recklessness. It was a reminder that even deep knowledge and years of experience cannot always protect against nature's unpredictability. Dinkelman's wife, Kirsty, and their 3 children, Taylor, Maddie, and Rex, remained at his side during his final days. After his passing, Taylor shared a message of gratitude and remembrance, reflecting the family's commitment to continuing his mission. Supporters around the world described how his videos had helped them overcome fear of snakes and appreciate the ecosystems surrounding them. Throughout his career, Dinkelman had worked to promote responsible wildlife handling and conservation. He led outreach programs across rural South Africa, teaching residents that most snake encounters could end safely without killing the animals. He partnered with schools and local authorities to teach identification, first aid for bites, and habitat protection. His online content, viewed by millions, combined demonstrations with straightforward lessons about respect for nature. Following his death, tributes poured in across social media and conservation circles. The team at Dingo's Animal Kingdom pledged to continue his educational work, while wildlife organizations in South Africa recognized his lasting contribution to public awareness about native species. His message, that snakes were not monsters but vital parts of the ecosystem, had reshaped public attitudes across the region. Experts also reflected on the dangers of wildlife education, noting that even with training, anti-venom access, and safety planning, severe allergic reactions like the one Dinkelman suffered remain unpredictable. His death became a stark reminder of the risks that come with working closely with wild animals. By late October, visitors gathered at his facility in KwaZulu-Natal to pay tribute, leaving flowers and letters outside the enclosures he once cared for. His family continued running Dingo's Animal Kingdom, ensuring his mission lived on, a reminder that respect for nature demands both courage and humility. Dinkelman's warning came from behind glass and scales, but in South Africa, the threat stood on 4 legs and watched through open windows. One photograph in the wrong moment would prove that instincts, not fences, decide the boundary. It was June 1, 2015, at the privately operated lion park in South Africa's Gauteng province, north of Johannesburg. The winter air was clear and dry, and vehicles moved slowly through the park's drive-through enclosures. Visitors were instructed to remain inside their cars at all times, windows closed, while lions roamed freely among the gravel roads and grass patches. Inside one of those vehicles sat 29-year-old Katherine Chappell, a visual effects artist from New York. She had flown to South Africa on a conservation-focused trip that mixed tourism with volunteer work, supporting efforts to protect rhinos and other threatened animals. Her professional life had taken her across continents. She had worked for an international visual effects company and contributed to several well-known productions, like the TV series Game of Thrones. Outside the studio, she devoted time and money to animal rescue and anti-poaching groups. That afternoon, Katherine booked a guided drive through the Lion Park north of Johannesburg, a popular attraction where visitors observed lions from the safety of their cars. She was accompanied by a local tour guide who drove the vehicle through the park's restricted areas. Lions could often be seen resting near the roadside, appearing calm and accustomed to the slow-moving cars that passed through each day. According to park officials and investigators who later reconstructed the event, Katherine and her guide entered the enclosure where two lions, a male and a female, were lying near the dirt road. The car stopped so she could take photographs. At some point, she lowered her window to get a clearer view. Park rules, printed on signs at the gate and repeated by guides, warned all visitors to keep windows up at all times because lions, though used to cars, remained unpredictable predators. The female lion moved closer to the vehicle, reportedly approaching from Katherine's side. In a matter of seconds, it lunged once through the open window. Witnesses from another car saw the lion's body collide with the door as it gripped her neck before releasing and stepping back into the road. The single bite caused catastrophic bleeding within seconds. The guide reacted immediately. He accelerated to move away from the lion and tried to stanch the bleeding as they called for help. The wound, however, was severe, and he too was injured during the struggle. Other park staff rushed to the scene. Emergency workers were alerted, and the area was closed to visitors. Paramedics reached the vehicle within minutes, but Katherine's condition had already deteriorated. She had lost a significant amount of blood from the neck wound, and despite efforts to stabilize her, she died before reaching a hospital. The guide was treated for his injuries and survived after being transported to a nearby medical center. The Lion Park released statements after the incident confirming that the attack had occurred inside one of its enclosures and emphasizing that safety rules were clearly displayed. Investigators found no mechanical failures or lapses in procedure. The determining factor was that a window had been lowered, creating an opening that allowed the animal to strike. Officials euthanized neither lion involved, stating that the animals had acted naturally in response to human proximity. News of Katherine Chappell's death spread quickly across South Africa and the United States. Within hours, major outlets reported the story, describing her background in visual effects and her work on globally known productions. Colleagues from the film industry and friends from conservation networks expressed shock at the loss of someone known for her professionalism and generosity. Back in her hometown in New York, family members released brief statements confirming her death and describing her as a person who loved both art and animals. Social media pages associated with her volunteer projects filled with condolences from around the world. The overlap between creative communities and wildlife groups made her passing widely felt. In South Africa, Katherine Chappell's death led to renewed discussion about visitor safety at wildlife parks. Authorities reviewed protocols at tourist sites where large predators roamed near vehicles, and Lion Park reinforced its rule requiring windows to stay closed, adding multilingual warnings for visitors. The incident also revived debate about drive-through predator parks, where animals appear free but remain within human-made boundaries that can give a false sense of security. Experts noted that lions in such parks, though accustomed to cars, still possess full predatory instincts. A quick movement or lowered barrier can trigger an attack with little warning. In the weeks that followed, tributes came from the film industry and the conservation community. Her colleagues held private memorials, while groups she supported emphasized responsible animal tourism over sensational details of the tragedy. At the park, staff implemented tighter visitor briefings and continued monitoring the lions involved. Officials confirmed the animals would not be euthanized, as they had acted instinctively. For many, her story served as a sobering reminder that admiration for wildlife must always be paired with caution, and that even controlled environments demand absolute respect for nature's unpredictability. Chappell's encounter showed how captivity can still hold danger. Far north, another advocate sought the wild with no barriers at all, living among predators he trusted, until one quiet evening erased the line between study and survival. It was early October 2003 in the Kaflia Bay area of Katmai National Park and Preserve. The season was turning cold, and snow had begun to dust the upper ridges surrounding Kaflia Bay. In the valley below, a small tent stood near a salmon stream that had grown quiet as the annual run ended. The campsite belonged to Timothy Treadwell and his companion Amy Huguenard. Both had been living among coastal brown bears for weeks, extending their stay into a time when most wildlife observers had already flown out for the year. Treadwell was 46 years old, an amateur naturalist who had spent 13 consecutive summers in Katmai filming and studying bears. Over the years, he had developed a reputation as both a passionate conservationist and a controversial figure. He believed that close contact with bears would help people understand and protect them, and his footage was used in documentaries and educational programs. Critics within the Park Service considered his approach unsafe, pointing out that he often camped within active feeding areas and ignored distance guidelines. By October 2003, when most bears were focused on late-season feeding before hibernation, he and Huguenard were the last campers remaining in that section of the park. In late September, weather along the Alaskan coast had shifted. Food sources were declining, and many bears had already moved inland. The pair's camp was set about a mile inland from Kaflia Bay, near the outlet of Kaflia Lake. They used a small tent, cooking gear, and a video camera that Treadwell frequently kept recording for his wildlife logs. He had decided to stay longer than planned to observe late-season bear behavior, believing his familiarity with the animals would protect them both. At some point between October 5th and 6th, a bear or multiple bears entered the campsite. The exact sequence could not be reconstructed, but evidence later recovered by park rangers showed that the tent was torn, cooking equipment scattered, and portions of clothing and remains spread across the area. A camera found nearby had recorded only sound, 6 minutes of audio without video, capturing the noises of distress and movement consistent with a bear attack. A pilot flying in to pick them up on October 6th noticed that the camp was unusually quiet, and no one emerged to greet the plane. When he landed and approached, he saw a large bear near the camp, and the site in disarray. He contacted park rangers, who arrived by helicopter later that day. The rangers were forced to shoot 2 bears, one large adult male and a smaller bear, when they behaved aggressively near the remains. Subsequent necropsy of the larger bear confirmed the presence of human tissue in its digestive tract. The National Park Service documented the scene in detail. The tent and personal items were recovered, along with the camera and audio tape. Based on the time of discovery, investigators concluded that the attack had occurred the previous evening. They described extensive evidence of bear activity within the immediate area, including tracks, scat, and drag marks leading toward nearby brush. The findings indicated that both victims had died quickly from injuries consistent with a predatory bear attack. Following standard protocol, rangers transported the remains to a coroner's office in Anchorage for identification and analysis. The park issued a preliminary report stating that Treadwell and Huguenard had been killed by a bear or bears during their final days in Katmai. The agency emphasized that food storage procedures appeared to have been followed, and no attractants such as garbage or bait were found. Investigators concluded that the attack was likely opportunistic, occurring late in the season when competition for food was high. Treadwell's background gave the incident added attention. He had written and spoken publicly about his belief that bears could sense human intentions and respond peacefully to trust. Supporters viewed his work as a personal crusade for wildlife preservation, while detractors warned that his approach blurred the line between respect and interference. His death and the circumstances surrounding it immediately reignited the debate over human interaction with large predators in protected areas. In the days following the discovery, news of the attack spread worldwide. The story of a seasoned bear advocate dying in the same wilderness he sought to protect drew intense attention. Investigators reviewed the recovered audio, which captured the sounds of the attack but contained no video. It was never released publicly. The National Park Service's report concluded that the pair had likely been caught off guard during evening hours, when bears often moved through the area in search of food. Within Katmai, officials reviewed backcountry policies and reinforced strict safety measures, maintaining distance from wildlife, using bear-resistant storage, and leaving before late fall when bear activity increases. These changes aimed not at assigning blame, but at preventing similar tragedies. Biologists later examined Treadwell's recordings and journals, finding valuable data on bear behavior alongside evidence of risky proximity to large adults. His footage revealed both dedication and misjudgment, rare documentation of wild bears, but captured at perilous distances. Timothy Treadwell's death, and that of Amy Huguenard, became one of the most studied wildlife fatalities in U.S. history. It served as a lasting reminder that admiration for nature must always be balanced with caution, respect, and distance. Treadwell's wilderness was landlocked and cold. Perry's was warm, salt-lined, and just as unforgiving. Different worlds, same truth. The sea, like the forest, never grants safety, only moments of calm before instinct returns. It was June 23, 2024, on Oahu's north shore near Lae. Midday light lay flat across the reef at Malekahana, and small summer lines folded toward the channel by Mokuauia, Goat Island. A lone surfer waited outside the sandbar, watching the water. His name was Tamayo Perry, a 49-year-old professional surfer, instructor, and Honolulu Ocean Safety Lifeguard. Perry grew up in Hawaiian waters and built his reputation on the North Shore's heaviest breaks, especially pipeline. In 1999, he won the Pipeline Masters Trials, recognition that marked him as a specialist in fast, hollow surf over shallow reef. He appeared in several Hawaii-filmed productions: Blue Crush, Hawaii 5-0, and Pirates of the Caribbean, on Stranger Tides, brief roles that reflected his place in local ocean culture. With his wife, he ran Oahu Surfing Experience, a small program focused on ocean awareness and hazard recognition. By 2016, he had joined the City and County of Honolulu's Ocean Safety Division. The job put him on North Shore towers through winter swells and shifting currents, where rescues depend on precise judgment. Early summer, however, is usually smaller, though the reef still demands attention. Currents bend around Goat Island, visibility can be high, and depth changes quickly near the outer coral ledges. By early afternoon that Sunday, conditions were ordinary: light trades, clear water, and intermittent waist-high sets. Regulars moved between the inside bar and the deeper channel, while beachgoers tracked the longshore current along the point. Shortly before 1 p.m., Honolulu Emergency Services received a report of a surfer in distress near Malekahana. Ocean safety lifeguards launched a personal watercraft from shore and followed the channel toward the outer reef. When they reached the surfer, they observed severe injuries consistent with a shark encounter. They stabilized what they could in the water, secured him to the rescue sled, and returned to the beach within minutes. Paramedics and firefighters were already staged at the shoreline. Medical care continued immediately, but the injuries were fatal, and the surfer was pronounced dead at the scene. Officials identified him as Tamayo Perry. Following established procedure, Ocean Safety closed the immediate area and posted shark warning signs along the shoreline. The Department of Land and Natural Resources, DLNR, was notified to coordinate marine hazard messaging and observations. Officials did not identify the species involved. The encounter was recorded as a fatal shark incident near the outer reef. News of the incident moved quickly across Oahu. The initial public statement summarized the sequence: a call around 1 p.m., lifeguard response by jet ski, shoreline transfer to EMS, and a confirmed fatality. Authorities clarified that Perry was off-duty and free surfing. The facts remained concise because the goal was practical clarity for the public: what happened, where it occurred, and how the beach would be managed while warnings were in place. For the surf community, the loss felt immediate. Perry's role at Pipeline had long been a reference point for commitment and control, and his lifeguard work translated those traits into prevention and rescue. Many students from his classes had met him again at North Shore Towers, where he repeated the basics: identify hazards, respect the lineup, and adjust to changing conditions. His career had become a loop: athlete, instructor, responder, tied to the same reefs he studied daily. Malekahana's layout explains both the draw and the risk. A shallow apron of coral leads to narrow channels that carry water toward Goat Island. Fish movement along those edges can occasionally bring predators closer to shore, even when surface conditions look calm. Experienced surfers account for these variables, but they cannot remove them. The response on June 23rd reflected that reality: swift, coordinated, and matter-of-fact. City officials outlined the timeline. Call received just before 1 p.m. Jet ski launch from the nearest tower, coordination with Honolulu Fire, police, and EMS on shore. The stretch from the main beach to the channel by Goat Island was posted with shark warning signs, and state officers monitored the area. No additional encounters were reported that afternoon. Authorities later confirmed that procedures were followed as designed. Lifeguards reached the patient by watercraft within minutes. EMS handled the pronouncement on shore, and hazard signs stayed up until the area was cleared. Perry's death stood as a measured reminder that training and local knowledge reduce risk, but never erase it. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.